Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane, Namaste Saraswati Deve, Gauravani Vicharane, Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskadyade Satarane. Today we're going to read from the Bhagavad Gita as it is, Chapter 4, Transcendental Knowledge, text number 2, entitled Parampara. I'll begin with text number 1. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Imam Vishvate Yogam Praktavanaham Aviyam Vivashvanmanave Praha Vanor Ishvakave Bravit. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada, but I'm just going to read the translation. The personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivashvan, and Vivashvan instructed to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed to Ikshvaku. Text number 2. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarsha vidu sakaleniha mahata yogo nashta parantapa. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciple succession, and the saintly kings understood in this way. But in the course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. Srila Prabhupada's purport. It is clearly stated that the Gita was especially meant for the saintly kings, because they were to execute its purpose in ruling over the citizens. Certainly, Bhagavad Gita was never meant for the demoniac persons who would dissipate its value for no one's benefit and would devise all types of interpretations according to personal whims. As soon as the original purpose was scattered by the motives of the unscrupulous commentators, there arose the need to reestablish the disciple succession. 5,000 years ago, it was detected by the Lord himself that the disciple succession was broken, and therefore he declared that the purpose of the Gita appeared to be lost. In the same way, at the present moment also, there are many editions of the Gita, especially in English, but almost all of them are not according to the authorized disciple succession. There are innumerable interpretations rendered by different mundane scholars, but almost all of them do not accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, although they make a good business on the words of Sri Krishna. This spirit is demoniac, because demons do not believe in God, but simply enjoy the property of the Supreme. Since there is a great need of an edition of the Gita in English, as is received by the Parampara disciple succession, an attempt is made herein to fulfill this great want. The Bhagavad Gita, accepted as it is a great boon to humanity, but if it is accepted as a treatise of philosophical speculations, it is simply a waste of time. Om Agyanatvanandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksura Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. In 1969, Srila Prabhupada came to Buffalo, New York, where I was a student. And at the same time, I was initiated by Prabhupada before he had come. He was initiated in February of that year. And Prabhupada was giving a talk at the university. Rupanuga Prabhu, who's the temple president, had an accredited course at the university. And Prabhupada was invited to give a lecture. After Prabhupada sat down, he asked Rupanuga Prabhu which verse he should read, and then Prabhupada opened the book and started to read from Bhagavad Gita 4:1, before this verse, about Parampara. Throughout Prabhupada's teachings, distribution of Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada always emphasized Parampara. As a matter of fact, Srila Prabhupada had mentioned on several occasions, specifically one time Prabhupada came to Mayapur to see the construction of the temples in Mayapur. And when he came to Mayapur, he went past Chaitanya Math, he went past the place where his spiritual master has samadhi there. And his godbrothers started to criticize him that just see Bhaktivedanta Swami, he doesn't even stop and honor the place of samadhi of his spiritual master. And Srila Prabhupada's remark was that, do they think I'm ever separated from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada? In other words, without actually meditating upon our spiritual master's connection with the acharyas in Parampara, there is no connection with the Parampara. And not only that, but we have to understand that even if we meditate upon our spiritual masters or any devotee's connection with Prabhupada, we also have to meditate upon Prabhupada's connection with his spiritual master. The Parampara is not just a collection of names to fill up a book of where it came from. It's actually everyone in the Parampara, including Srila Prabhupada or Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, as Prabhupada writes in the introduction to one of his books, that his spiritual masters will be pleased with the publication of this book because he's still watching my activities and overseeing them. Rough paraphrase. The same way Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada was always meditating upon his spiritual connection with the Parampara, Srila Gaurkishore Das Babaji. Those connections are eternal, and although we may imagine that Srila Gaurkishore Das Babaji was illiterate, not up to the intellectual standard of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, that out of sentiment, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada was meditating on Gaurkishore Das Babaji. But we know from the life of Gaurkishore Das Babaji that he was always meditating on his connection with the Parampara, namely Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur was meditating on his connection all the way through our Parampara to the six Goswamis. That connection is alive. It's not simply a theoretical connection. For a self-realized person, such a meditation is a direct guidance from their acharyas in disciple succession. It's called transparency. Transparency goes through the Panchatattva, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as Advaita Acharya said, wherever you go, Lord Chaitanya, that is Vrindavan. So to get to Vrindavan, we have to go through all the links. If we're trying to connect with the electricity power station, we have to be sure that when we put the plug into the wall, we understand that when the light bulb lights up, there is a connection all the way down, all the way to the power station. Otherwise, the light bulb would not light up simply by plugging the plug into the wall. So in the same way, everything about Srila Prabhupada includes our entire disciple succession, which includes the Panchatattva, the six Goswamis and the Panchatattva, and also includes Krishna's unlimited pastimes, both in the material and the spiritual worlds. Everything is there simultaneously. When we read Srila Prabhupada's books, the whole connection, the whole parampara is there, including Krishna's associates in Vrindavan or Arjuna's presence in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, speaking to Krishna. It is not simply an intellectual exercise. It's an exercise given to us, was an experience given to us by self-realized persons such as Srila Prabhupada, who's actually connected with the other self-realized persons in the disciple succession. Now, our hearts may not be so clear or so broad or so capable of being able to meditate on a whole disciple succession, but we should understand that it exists. Otherwise, just like here in Ljubljana, as in most temples, there's so many pictures of Krishna, Lord Krishna's pastimes. There's pictures of our Parampara up to a certain point. There's pictures of Lord Chaitanya. Sometimes we have photos of the six Goswamis on the altar. So how is it all connected? It's all part of the chain of disciple succession. And the more we connect it together, then the more we can experience what actually Krishna consciousness is. Then the more the flow of the spiritual energy comes through without any break. But that may take some time, but we should become aware of it. That when we read Srila Prabhupada's books, it is not simply some letters on a page that we're reading. When we're trying to chant Hare Krishna in the following the disciple succession, then it's not simply some letters of the alphabet, but everything is there. Everything should be there in our consciousness, but everything is there whether we're conscious of it or not. That we receive the Mahamantra in the line of disciple succession, and although our initiating guru may not be on that level where he experiences the whole parampara and directly in the spiritual world, but Prabhupada is there, the knowledge is there, and we're being taught how to connect to Prabhupada, who is experiencing the entire disciple succession through the six Goswamis, through the Panchatattva, and he's living his consciousness, his existence is actually in the spiritual world. And to the extent that any one of us are self-realized, which means to the extent that any one of us are actually connected with the parampara, not through knowledge, but through practical service, then to that extent, we'll also be in the spiritual world with Krishna and his associates, and in this world with the whole parampara. All the acharyas will give us their blessings, and ultimately we'll be with Krishna and his associates in the spiritual world through the blessings of the acharyas, through the blessings of the Panchatattva. Ultimately, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will allow us to enter into the spiritual world in the same feelings of separation that he's eternally experiencing from Krishna and his associates in the spiritual world. In the meantime, as it says in the Bhagavad Gita, that we should understand that our goal is Krishna. Sometimes they say that there is 7 purposes of ISKCON, as I mentioned before, that in one document, the lawyers put together out of 27 or more purposes of ISKCON that Prabhupada had written, they took 7 of them. 7 important purposes of ISKCON, such as establishing holy places of pilgrimage and teaching simple living and high thinking, etc., whatever. 7 purposes of ISKCON. 27 were actually written by Prabhupada. But actually, in the Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada writes, Smarta vyak sadatam vishnor, vismartak jatu na kinchit, sarva vidi nisedyasyur, etiyor eva kinkara. That the purpose of sadhana bhakti, which is the means by which we can gradually come back to our spiritual awareness, the whole purpose of sadhana bhakti, whether it's the five powerful processes, chanting Hare Krishna, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, worshiping the deities, serving the devotees, or living in a holy place, or making the atmosphere spiritual, especially by distributing Krishna consciousness to others. That will make other places holy also. Oh, by the way, if everyone who can, if they can put on their video, that would be appreciated. If it's possible. These five powerful processes, they all have the same purpose. To always remember Krishna and never to forget him. Of course, by following these five powerful processes, it adds the element of devotion to remembering Krishna. Kamsa also was always remembering Krishna and never forgot him. But generally, we don't take him as a exemplary sadhana bhakta. Although we know he didn't chant 16 rounds a day, but he was on the spontaneous platform of remembering Krishna and never forgetting him, mainly out of fear of being killed by Krishna. After all, Narada Muni had reminded him, or had told him, and Narada Muni was the friend of everyone, the demons and the devotees, whatever, even the demons have faith in him, told Kamsa that in your previous life, you were Kalanimi, and that you were the big hero on the fight between the demigods and the demons. A fight goes on eternally. You don't have to worry about who won, because there's always, in this fight between the demigods and the demons, there's always a time when the demons get out ahead. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very exciting. If the demigods always won, then no one would actually take it seriously. But because the demons sometimes win, just like we see in the present society, it doesn't appear that the demigods or the devotees are changing the world right now. Hopefully the demons don't change the aspiring devotees. Anyhow, in the fight between the demigods and the demons, Kalanimi was a big hero, killing so many demigods, riding on a lion. Don't try and imitate Kalanimi. So Kalanimi, the demigods, the demons, in spite of all disadvantages, because they had not gotten their share of nectar from Mohini Morti, were somehow or another defeating the demigods. So the demigods, as usual, they got together and they started to pray to Lord Vishnu to please come and save them. And I imagine that the demons were also praying that if these demigods do as usual and pray to Vishnu to save them, then this is an opportunity we can kill Vishnu, which they're always anxious to do. So Krishna, hearing the prayers of the demigods, came riding on the back of Garuda. Kalanimi thought, this is a great opportunity to kill Vishnu. He's right here before me. Not exactly very devotional. So Kalanimi threw a sphere, his trident at Vishnu. Vishnu caught the trident. It was a game of catch, by the way. And Vishnu threw the trident back at Kalanimi, and Kalanimi caught it, but in the wrong place, in his chest. And that was the end of that manifestation of Kalinimi. Now being killed by Vishnu, he took birth as Kamsa. And Kamsa, as we know, he was driving the chariot of his sister Devaki during her wedding, after her wedding to Vasudeva. And Kamsa heard a voice from the sky. I don't know how many of us usually hear voices from the sky, but if we hear them, we shouldn't take them very seriously. In any case, this voice from the sky told told Kamsa that the eighth child of your sister is going to kill you. Kamsa, being a demon, was very upset, and he immediately, without any thought, he took out his sword to cut off the head of Devaki. Therefore, we shouldn't trust a politician like Kamsa, even if he's driving you in a car, whatever. Be careful, especially voices from the sky. In any case, Vasudeva had convinced Kamsa to stop his slaughter of his sister, but he became very fearful that Vishnu is going to come and kill me again. And therefore, day and night, he was constantly meditating on Vishnu. Everywhere he looked, all he could see was Vishnu. So he was following Krishna's instruction in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, the true yogi observes me in all beings and also sees every being in me. Indeed, the self-realized soul sees me, the same Supreme Lord, everywhere. And for one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost to him, nor he's ever lost to me. Now, Kamsa was on that platform. Everywhere he saw was Vishnu. Even his wives, he had two wives by our famous personality named Jarasandha. His daughter is with Kamsa's wives. As the mafia says, keep it in the family. So, second biggest demon was Jarasandha, and his daughters married Kamsa, as would be expected. And when, I forget the names, when they came to see Kamsa one day, Kamsa was so absorbed in meditation upon Vishnu that he didn't see his two wives. He saw Krishna and Balaram. And so he took out his sword and he was going to cut the heads off. And they said, wait a second, Kamsa. We're not Krishna and we're not Balaram. We're your wives. So he said, oh, I'm sorry. It was a bad day and everyone has a bad day. So we can imagine that even at the time of death, when Krishna was personally on Kamsa's chest, beating him to death, Kamsa, he remembered Krishna, and he got liberation. Although he wasn't one of the two demons, there was other demons who were the doorkeepers of Vaikuntha, and in that incarnation, it wasn't Kamsa, it was Shishupal and Dantavakra. Anyhow, Kamsa got some benefit from being killed by Krishna. So that is not the type of meditation we're talking about. That when we go through the instructions of the pure devotee, or we also make progress by hearing instructions from those who have following the pure devotees, such as Srila Prabhupada, in connection with the Parampara, and according to their experience and realizations, can also help us understand what is the path of connecting with Krishna, reviving our relationship with Krishna. because that's the purpose of the Hare Krishna movement, is to always remember Krishna and never forget him through devotional service. So it's devotional service in Krishna consciousness. Because as Prabhupada writes in the introduction, each one of us has an eternal relation with Krishna. Our eternal relationship is not with the material world, it's with Krishna. And if we want to revive that relationship, there is a system Krishna has set up called Parampara. And that's what he explains in Bhagavad Gita. There's no other way of connecting with Krishna and with bhakti. Because Krishna says, Tattvataha, in this life or in some future time, we have to connect with Krishna through experience. It is not that, as Prabhupada said in one lecture, now I'm giving you initiation and you can take it and you, more or less, I'm paraphrasing, not exactly the words. You can utilize it and become gradually Krishna conscious. But if you don't utilize what I'm giving you, there's nothing I can do. It's up to you to make progress in devotional service. It's your responsibility. Prabhupada would spend time writing his books, giving lectures, directing the establishment of farm communities, temples, gurukuls, but it was up to his followers to take his instructions and example and apply them for their benefit so they could, while they're doing their service, they could always remember Krishna and avoid forgetting him. So that requires our practical service. As Prabhupada writes in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita in the purport, that, actually I'll quote the exact thing because this is Bhagavad Gita chapter 3. No, I'm sorry, chapter 5. Chapter 5, the last verse, which is verse 29. I'll just start here. A pure soul is the eternal servant of God, as its fragmental part and parcel comes into contact with Maya, illusion, due to the desire to lord it over Maya, and that is the cause of his many sufferings. As long as he's in contact with matter, he has to execute work in terms of material necessities. Krishna consciousness, however, brings one into spiritual life, even while one is in the jurisdiction of matter, for it is an arousing of spiritual existence by practice in the material world. The more one is advanced, the more he is freed from the clutches of matter. The Lord is not partial toward anyone. Please repeat that. The Lord is not partial to anyone. He doesn't like someone and dislike someone else. If Hiranyakashipu, when he saw Lord Nrsimhadev, would have offered obeisances and surrendered to Lord Nrsimhadev, Lord Nrsimhadev would not have given him an acute stomach problem. But because Hiranyakashipu was a demon, he fought with the Lord, as was his destiny. But if a demon turns and surrenders to Krishna, like Prahlad Maharaj, then he becomes a great devotee. And if a devotee like Indra opposes Krishna, then Krishna will defeat him in his own way. So the Lord is not partial to anyone. Everything depends on one's practical performance of duties in Krishna consciousness, which helps one control the senses in every respect and conquer the influence of desire and anger. And one who stands fast in Krishna consciousness controlling the above-mentioned passions, remains factually in the transcendental stage or Brahma Nirvana. So it's our practical duties in Krishna consciousness that is given to us through our parampara. Prabhupada was very clear when he came to, as I mentioned before, when he came to Buffalo in 1969, and that he observed the devotees there. Now, the most senior devotee in the temple at that time was Rupanuga Prabhu, and he was in the movement for maybe 2 years. And you have to remember at that time there were the only books available were Srila Prabhupada's 3 Bhagavatams, the first canto, written in a very not a very familiar style to most devotees. We had no Bhagavad Gita. We hardly had a morning program, although that was appearing at that time, but it was not very complete. We didn't even have the Nrsingadev prayers. I guess we had the Guru Vastika prayers. And we had something which was apparently like the Gaur Arti in its own format, which was not exactly the same Gaur Arti we have now. So at that time, you can imagine that there was a lot of, as now, there was a lot of there was more speculation then than there is now, if you can imagine that. Or I could say there was an equal amount of speculation back there then. There's more devotees now to speculate than there were then. So Prabhupada observed us, and he mentioned to our temple president that some of the speculations, like we were singing different songs, we had gotten from some of the devotees who were in India. There was a few devotees in India, and they had picked up different melodies and different songs, and we thought everything was spiritual and divine. Gopal, Gopal. We were singing Gopal, Gopal. Luckily I forgot what it was. I try to remember Gopal, but I forgot the song we were singing. And Prabhupada corrected that. He said, we only sing the songs given to us by our previous acharyas. Similarly, there were ideas that Prabhupada was correcting, as Prabhupada's entire preaching pastimes are all meant to deliver the parampara to us and the dangers of not following the parampara and deviating. And Prabhupada had to extensively deal with that. And we still have to deal with it. And it's not so easy to understand. In the 70s, there was what was called the Gopi Baba Club. It wasn't the official name of the Gopi Baba Club, but it was nicknamed the Gopi Baba Club. And there were 2 clubs. There was the ladies' Gopi Baba Club and the men's Gopi Baba Club. And all they did was read Krishna's pastimes with the gopis, citing as a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam that if you hear the gopis' pastimes with Krishna, then even if your heart is contaminated, then all traces of lust will go away. So they found passages in Srila Prabhupada's books, and they simply talked about, meditated on Krishna's pastimes with the gopis. And Prabhupada's, authorities at that time became concerned, and they told Prabhupada when he came to Los Angeles that there's 2 different Gopi Baba clubs in our community, male and female, only reading Gopi's pastimes with Krishna in the Srimad Bhagavatam, whatever Krishna book was available then too. And they cited as a reason for doing so the verse from the Bhagavatam that even if there's some impurities in your heart, you hear the gopis' pastimes with Krishna, and all the impurities will go away. And Prabhupada said, actually, they won't become purified. The word he used was putrefied. You know that word, Lavangalata, Maharaji? Putrefied?
Yes, Maharaj, I know that word, yes.
And there were many arguments given to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, if they follow this, well, first of all, he asked them, are the men in the club wearing saris yet? They weren't wearing saris at that time. And then Prabhupada explained that if this goes on, then our whole preaching movement will be destroyed. If we think that it is so cheap to purify one's heart just by hearing some pastimes, intimate pastime between Krishna and his devotees, then that's called Prakriti Sahaja. We don't even know that we're not this body, and we're thinking that we're gopis or whatever we're thinking we are. That stage will come automatically. The state of realizing our spiritual identity comes automatically at the stage of asakti, when one's mind is completely fixed on Krishna. Even if there's a slight deviation, the mind immediately comes back to thinking about Krishna. In the stage before, though, that there's ruchi and there's nishta. And at the stage of nishta is liberation from all material concepts. So we're still in the material concept of life. It is not wrong to read Krishna book. Prabhupada very early gave us Krishna book, which has Krishna's pastimes with the gopis. But he didn't expect us to imagine ourselves to be some gopi in Vrindavan with Krishna just by reading the book. There's a difference between realization and intellectual understanding. Prabhupada wanted us to have intellectual understanding. Otherwise, there would be no impetus to become conscious of Krishna or to go back to the spiritual world. If we don't understand the wonders of the spiritual activities of Krishna, then we'll become impersonalists. We have to have something to aspire to, something that's appreciated by us, that's exciting to us, that's encouraging to us. We have to be encouraged by what our future is. But just by imagining a future, just by imagining, at least on this level, if we imagine there's a big feast and that we're eating the feast, it's very unlikely we're going to get fat by doing so. Of course, it's possible, but generally speaking, eating is different from just imagining we're eating. Could you imagine there's a big feast and we come there and there's nothing there, and the temple president says, I'm sorry, we couldn't cook the feast today, but we're going to recite all the different food preparations we were planning to make, so please meditate on them and be happy. It probably wouldn't be the most successful Sunday feast in the year. So this experience of Krishna consciousness doesn't depend upon our imagining ourselves to be in any particular identity. The only identity we have to think about is that we're the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Gopi Bharata Pada Kamalayar, Dasa Dasa Anudasa. And that's our disciple succession. And those who are in the disciple succession. It is not that any one of us are outside of this disciple succession because we're not self-realized. No, just the activity of following these self-realized persons, such as Srila Prabhupada, puts us into a disciple succession. Our activities are spiritual although our consciousness may not be completely spiritual. And although our consciousness may not be completely spiritual, if we follow the spiritual instructions and act in a spiritual way, then the result is our consciousness will become spiritual. Prabhupada used to use the example, if you have an iron rod and you put it into fire, the iron rod is not fire. But when it's put into fire, it becomes hotter and hotter and hotter until it takes the same quality as the fire. Wherever you touch it, it'll act like fire. It won't act like iron. So we have to be realistic, see where we're presently at in our consciousness, not try to imitate devotees on a higher level, try to correct ourselves as much as we can, as much as the intelligence given to us by the Super Soul and by our friends in Krishna consciousness, so we can make corrections according to our ability, and gradually decrease our materialistic activities and gradually increase our spiritual ones. That's all we can do in our present stage. We don't have to jump. We don't have to jump forward or backwards. We just have to do to the best of our ability, follow the Acharya in disciple succession and those who are actually following the Acharya in disciple succession. And everyone is eligible to do that. Kali Yuga is going on, not even in full force yet. If you want to find out what Kali Yuga is actually going to be like, please read the 12th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam if you're curious. But anyhow, there may be many parts of the Bhagavatam that we don't have experience of, but in the 12th canto of Bhagavatam, we already have experience of that canto at least, where it describes Kali Yuga. So, if we take shelter of the Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, and those who are following the Acharya in disciple succession, that includes everyone has their duties to perform according to Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada gave us duties for the initiating gurus, for the Shiksha gurus, for the temple presidents, to the DBCs. And if we understand our position properly and perform our service, then we can make progress in any particular service we have in the Hare Krishna movement by strictly following the instructions of the previous acharyas, coming through Srila Prabhupada and his bona fide representatives. Then we'll have Prabhupada's association. And through Prabhupada's association, when we become more serious, then it'll be revealed, as Prabhupada had mentioned, that when they wanted to put Srila Prabhupada's Murti on the altar, Prabhupada insisted that the Murti of his spiritual master should also be there. That Prabhupada never considered himself an independent authority. He considered himself a servant of his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. Similarly, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada was a servant of his spiritual master, all the way back to the six Goswamis. Srila Rupa Goswami is actually the founder Acharya. As it says, he understood the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu specifically instructed him, so therefore we chant Om Agyana Timanandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksura Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swav Kadantikam. So it's through this succession we become connected to Srila Rupa Goswami, who's given us Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as our guide for our devotional service. And through Srila Rupa Goswami, we become connected with Lord Chaitanya and the Panchatattva, who exist in the spiritual realm. through feelings of separation. So gradually, as we remember Krishna, as we experience Krishna, simultaneously with that, our feelings of separation from Krishna will develop. And at the same time, we'll actually become more and more connected to Krishna. We shouldn't lament we're not in the spiritual world. Of course, we should lament that we're not in the spiritual world. That's a good lamentation. But we shouldn't become overwhelmed with that kind of lamentation either, because by following this process, we will be in the spiritual world, even this lifetime. The more we practice Krishna consciousness seriously, enthusiastically, and steadily, then the more we will be in the spiritual world. If that practice is especially under the guidance, connecting us with the Prabhupada and our whole disciple succession. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Any questions?
Maharaj, can I ask a question, please?
Yes. Of course.
How does the individual disciple have to digest the moment when his spiritual master no longer wants to be a spiritual master and leaves his disciple? I understand how technically you can get reinitiated, everything, but internally, how do we digest that moment where the connection promised was withdrawn without your consent, without your doing so? How does disciples survive that?
Well, we should understand, as Krishna, thank you for the question. I don't, we've seen that in ISKCON sometimes. Now, the point is that Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Mahatmanas tumam partha daivim prakritim ashritya vajanyanyana manaso gyatva bhutadim avyam. That those who are engaged in devotional service, they're under the spiritual energy. And therefore, Krishna considers them to be Mahatmas. Now, externally, someone may deviate from following, and we may think, oh, he's fallen. Now, the question is, which one of us don't deviate from devotional service during the day or whatever? There may be a difference in time. Maybe someone deviates for a lifetime, someone deviates for days, someone deviates for a few moments or a few minutes. So what is that deviation? They stop. Sadatam kirtiyanto mam yatantas shadrida vritaha namasyantas shamam bhaktya nityukta upasade. Always chanting my glories. So as soon as we stop thinking about Krishna, then we're deviating. Now, should we go around, someone sees that, can read our mind and say, this person has forgotten Krishna for an hour, and then put on Facebook, so-and-so has fallen. Yes, they've fallen, but luckily they pick themselves up, hopefully, and they come back to Krishna consciousness, although it may not be noticed by others. Others may deviate and forget Krishna, and we think they're fallen. And they are fallen. When they stop chanting Hare Krishna, they lose their determination to engage in sadhana bhakti and to spread Krishna consciousness. It's not possible for one who's actually on the platform of prema bhakti or even slightly below that, bhava or sakti, to forget Krishna, but to deviate entirely from Krishna consciousness. And he asks, how do we take it? ISKCON, somehow or another, in my opinion, we've been improperly trained. That this may be somewhat controversial, but it's practical. That Srila Prabhupada never expected that the initiating gurus within our society would take the role of an acharya, and that they should be viewed by the disciple before they take initiation, that they're as good as God, that they're actually ashrayas. But if they themselves take the position of an acharya and allow the disciples to imagine them, well, to tell how would you put this? To believe that their understanding of their spiritual master is an absolute understanding, so absolute that they don't have to take shelter of other devotees and authorities within ISKCON. That is a very unfortunate position. In other words, Prabhupada created a society where everyone in the society is actually a representative of the Parampara as much as they've understood and followed Prabhupada's instructions. It is not that only my initiating spiritual master is a representative of the Parampara and everyone else is on some other level. They may be on even a higher level than my initiating guru, or they may not be. But anyhow, the initiating guru, the Shiksha guru, their service is not to take Prabhupada's place, but to help others understand Prabhupada correctly and understand the other devotees who represent Prabhupada correctly. Which Srila Prabhupada has also manifested himself, not only through his books or through his murti in the temple, he's also manifesting himself through those who are following his teachings. So, if our initiating guru, which has difficulty, which is very unfortunate, then it's not that we've lost our connection with Prabhupada. Our connection is there as much as we've understood, and we become a servant of the society that he's created with proper understanding, with proper knowledge coming from Prabhupada. And then our connection with the Parampara is not broken. But we should not take initiation lightly either, because Prabhupada emphasized that in the Nectar of Devotion, other teachings, that without connection, without taking initiation, the actual connection with Krishna is not made. But that initiation has to be properly understood. The initiation is we're developing a mood of service and surrender, and we're making a vow to give up our false ego and accepting ourselves as servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. That is, we're accepting ourselves as servants of the Parampara, connecting ourselves. So as long as one keeps on following the process, and if later on one becomes inspired by some other devotee and wants to reaffirm his vow to become a servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna, that's good. But we need a spiritual master who actually has the proper understanding and is not trying to create their own movement, which is in violation of Srila Prabhupada's instructions, a violation of just common sense, that Prabhupada never assigned anyone except for the managers that he gave the duties to utilize ISKCON's resources and to utilize resources means money and manpower independently of the authorities that Prabhupada established, the GBC, the temple presidents, etc. These are the actual authorities to manage money and manpower in ISKCON. And the job of the initiating guru is to inspire, show an example of sadhana, inspire his disciples, and show an example of sadhana, that they should follow the instructions coming to simple succession of sadhana and preaching, and cooperate with the authorities within ISKCON. So that's when a spiritual master sometimes leaves. It may be due, it may actually, it's very sad, but it actually may be purifying for the spiritual master and also for the disciples if they take it in the right way, to re-examine some of the teachings, some of the examples that their initiating guru is following that led them astray. And the most significant one is when the spiritual master accepts too many disciples, or not even a few disciples, but has the wrong attitude believes himself to be the enjoyer and the controller of the disciples, rather than a servant of the ISKCON that Prabhupada created, the family of devotees, then this becomes a very difficult burden on the spiritual master and may lead him yogas chalati manasa. As soon as one tries to make spiritual advancement, then Maya will try to trick one by so many different allurements. So it's sad, but the spiritual master who left, he's eternal. Hopefully, in the course of time, he'll reestablish his connection with ISKCON, or if he may not even lose it, he may just not be able to follow the principles or whatever strictly, or for whatever reason. So it's a problem, but it's a problem of proper understanding and going forward with the proper intelligence, the proper understanding, and hopefully our ISKCON society will also, the leadership will actually get the proper understanding in the future, so they'll actually protect those who are giving initiation and not allow them to misuse their service or misunderstand their service, and be guided by the instructions of Prabhupada and their associates in devotional service, protect them from this misunderstanding that they're the controllers and the enjoyers of anything in this world. They're just servants of the servants of Krishna under Prabhupada's protection and under the protection of Srila Prabhupada's representatives. Is that okay?
Yes, Maharaj, thank you so much. So the problem is not the actual falling. The problem is the proper understanding of what happened and re-examining your values.
Yeah, I mean, falling down is always a problem. It's not only the failure of the individual, it's also the failure to some extent of the authorities within ISKCON to properly establish the role so that these things don't happen. Is that okay?
Yes, Maharaj, that's understandable on the level of intelligence. However, emotionally, it's quite difficult to understand, because we're all, become a family, and when you become a family, you can understand many things on the level of your intelligence, but emotionally, it's still quite difficult because it's
Yeah,
a
well,
part of the parampara.
the part that we find difficult is like Bali Maharaj. He gave up his connection with Sukracharya. He did not have emotional breakdown when he surrendered to Vamanadeva. But because of our attachments, we choose someone as a spiritual master, not necessarily that we can understand the qualifications of the person or the dynamics that he's working under, but we become emotionally attached to his example. One of the prospects is that we can also become like him in the future and have the same situation that he has. So in a society where there's no economic support for anyone, it's all you're on your own, it's very attractive to get a position or to have a leader who seems to be economically independent of the society. So sometimes we become emotionally attached to someone like that. And when they have a failure, then it's very discouraging, because this is only one point of view. There are many other unlimited points of view. But, we become disturbed because we think that our example of independence and enjoying and et cetera, didn't work out the way I hoped it would. And therefore we become disturbed that I put in so much effort, put in so much money, so much time, so much service with this future I thought I was creating for myself, and it turned out to be a failure. It was a bad investment. So sometimes it's because we don't realize that we have to, if we want to actually take advantage of this society as Prabhupada presented it to us and make progress in Krishna consciousness, we can't do it independent of our acharyas and Prabhupada. No matter how we imagine that someone is elevated, if they're not following strictly Prabhupada and the acharyas, or those who are strictly following Prabhupada and the acharyas, then they get into problems. And that will also get into problems, or we've gotten into problems. And there's a wake-up call for that, emotionally or intellectually, whatever it is. Does that mean that we shouldn't surrender to the devotees and serve them because our investment is wrong? We may go wrong. No, it means that we should give up this fruit of activity, that I'm doing this to get some benefit, material benefit in the future. We should do it out of love and devotion, and give it this idea of upward mobility by becoming a servant of Krishna's servants, that somehow or another my material position will become better, and I'll be able to enjoy in the material world on a platform and get the benefits of the spiritual world at the same time. Is that okay? Anyhow, I can't, emotions as such, they're not very easily, because emotions are a manifestation of emotion. It also depends on our intelligence. And if our intelligence is not well developed, then it's very difficult to control our minds, even under normal circumstances, but to speak of catastrophic circumstances, like the fall down of what we thought was an advanced devotee. They're more advanced than we are. It doesn't mean that they were perfect, that's all. Nor does it mean that our relation with them is not eternal. We're eternally related to everyone. We're all eternal servants of Krishna. But whether that helps emotionally or not, that depends upon how much intelligence we have. Anything else? Thank you very much. Grantaraj Shriman Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premanand.
Thank you very much, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Guru
Hare
Prabhupada.
Krishna.
Thank you very much, Kumari.
Thank you, Lavanga Mata. Thank you, Nihota Prabhu. Hare Krishna, everyone.
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Have a lovely
Guru
week.
Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Guru Maharaj. Thank you.